Hello students, this video is about inland and maritime trade in Indian subcontinent and also in rest of Asia as well as in Europe. So this is mainly about the trading networks that were present between Asia and Europe before colonization. So this time period 16th to 17th century, this time period is also called as the early modern time in Indian history, and also in context of rest of Asia this is considered as the early modern time because in this time the new technologies were emerging in both the areas, like both in Asia and Europe. Europe was not yet industrialized. Even though new discoveries were made, Europe was going through scientific revolution. Europe was also discovering new areas, like different trading routes that were present already in the world. So European merchants were already discovering these. So this was a vibrant time for both Asia and Europe. And in context of Asia, what we see is that Indian Ocean was a very busy place in this time, because through Indian Ocean there were many trading routes that were passing through, and these were connecting Asia with Europe. So what we see is that there were many areas, like the South China Sea, East Africa, the Persian Gulf, Red Sea, Japan. These were the areas which were quite busy for mercantile activities, and in these areas the routes were going via Indian Ocean networks. So for this particular time, for 16, 17, and even till early 18th centuries, and for the mercantile activities, Indian Ocean trade was had an important role to play, and this also actually contributed in India's internal trade. So that is why in this video I am going to briefly talking about the external trade, that was the trading networks that were passing through Indian Ocean, and how this also influenced India's internal trade. So when it comes to Indian Ocean trade networks, there were basically three major zones. These were the Arabian Sea, which is on the western side of Indian subcontinent, then the South China Sea, which is in East Asia, and also Bay of Bengal, which is in the eastern side of Indian subcontinent. So these three zones played an important role in connecting the ports that were located around these areas, and also connecting Asia with Europe. Then these three zones were further divided into different subzones. So there were different places through which there were different ports through which goods were collected, and these places were actually also the destination for inland, the goods that originated inland, and then they traveled to these port areas, and from these ports they traveled to their destination either in Asia or in Europe. So the routes that were there, these connected Aden to Canton. So Aden is in East Africa, and then Canton is in China. Then there is the Persian and Arab merchants who were regular in these trade routes. So long before the Europeans discovered these routes, the Persian and Arab merchants were present, and they were using these routes for circulation of goods. Then there were other ports on these routes, including Calicut and Sumatra. Then there were other mercantile groups also present, along with the Persian and Arabic merchants. These were Chinese, Indian ethnicities included Gujarati, Bengali, Uriya, Chettis, South Indian mercantile groups. These were all present, and the goods that were briskly traded in these networks included muslin, which is the finest quality of cotton clothes, Gujarati silk, coarse cotton, which is not the best quality, and then rubies and other precious stones, different kind of spices including pepper, textile, food grains, butter, sugar, and oil, Bengal raw silk. So these different categories of commodities were traded through these networks by different groups of merchants in this time period. In the 16th century, for the first time, we see intervention of Europeans in the form of the Portuguese. So the Portuguese entered Indian Ocean trade in the 16th century. So in the late 16th century, and they dominated the Cape route till the last decade of the 16th century and controlled Asia-Europe trade. By the beginning of the 17th century, the value of import and export between Asia and Lisbon declined. Lisbon is in Portugal. So basically, the Portuguese lost their control over Asia trade by the beginning of the 17th century. So we in this time we see participation of other Europeans. So and these other Europeans were also encouraged by their crown. So in case of England, the English East India Company was formed by the early 17th century, and the French East India Company was also formed in the early 17th century. There were other European companies like the Dutch and the Italian, Swedish. So these were all encouraged by their ruling class. So in this time they also tried to encourage their maritime activities. So basically these mercantile groups are also given the authority to use some kind of force in while navigating, and this gave way. So basically there was also an increasing competition, because there was also an increasing presence of Europeans in different areas, especially in context of India. We see that the French and the British, they started competing amongst themselves for establishing factories, for creating kind of market in Indian subcontinent, that we see in different Anglo French wars in South India. In Bengal also these wars were present or visible. At the same time, we also see emergence of places that were not earlier present, like Madras is an example. Madras was a city that was created during the intervention of the English East India Company. So Madras became a port which sheltered artisans, merchants, factors, and then the goods that were produced inland, these came to Madras, and from there these traveled to Europe. So these are some examples. Like similarly, in case of Western India, there were places like Surat that were center of mercantile activities. However, because the Mughals were present and Mughals were quite formidable at this time, the Europeans did not get much chance to create a kind of dominating influence in these areas. So resultantly, we see emergence of Bombay and eventual decline of Surat. So these kind of changes were happening at the same time in India. So these changes, like the coming of Europeans and opening of factors, these were not simply limited to Europeans, but in case of internal trading networks also we see changes, that some places become important like Madras or Bombay. And we also see that as in internally India's political changes happened, so the Europeans gained more ground over these areas. In these internal trades, the lubricating factors were the saraf and the hundi system. So sarafs were basically groups of people who used to handle cash, and hundis were the cashless cash. So basically these are kind of banknote which were used as a kind of credit system for circulation of credit. So in lieu of carrying cash, the merchants can carry hundi, and the sharafs were kind of individuals or communities that were engaged in this hundi business. And along with that, we also see different kind of currencies that were in circulation in this time, which includes pagoda, mohur, kauri, badam, and tins. Hundis were basically for raising or transferring fund. So these were not actually credit cash. And along with that, in the late 17th and early 18th century, we also see that some level of industrialization happened in textiles, especially in Bengal. So Bengal was on one hand a center where good quality cotton textile was produced, but at the same time, Bengal also exported large volume of raw silk, and the volume reached its highest level in the 1740s. So before the mid 18th century, Bengal exported a very large quantity of raw silk. There were other commodities where Indian participation was visible, includes diamond and opium. So in case of diamond, Indian merchants were initially active in diamond trading, but later this gave way to Europeans. In case of opium, India was not a market of opium, but India was the ground where opium was produced, and then these were further exported to China. So here also we see participation of Indian merchants. According to Om Prakash, this trade networks that were happening in between Europe and Asia, and also internally in Asia, especially in South Asia, these were mutually beneficial, and the Europeans and both Indian mercantile groups and Europeans gained profit in these networks.